Take a look at this picture right here. This is a picture of the 1976 U.S. Women's Olympic team. And 1976 would be the first time that women were allowed to compete in basketball at the Olympics, and this team took home the silver medal. On this team, you have some of the greatest female basketball players to ever play the game. There was Nancy Lieberman, a woman so talented that she earned the nickname Lady Magic because her game was so similar to Magic Johnson. There was the subject of part 3 of this series, Meyers, who would later go on to become the only woman to ever sign an NBA contract when she tried out and made the Indiana Pacers rosters. There was also Pat Head, whom you know as Pat Summitt, who is arguably the greatest college coach of all time. But out of all these phenomenal female athletes, there was one who stood above the rest. There was one who would end up leading the team in both points and rebounds, and sadly, you've probably never even heard of her. And that is this woman right here, Lusia Harris. But don't take my word for it. Listen to her teammates speak about how great she was.
She's tough, she's intense, she's physical.
Nobody could stop her. Her power in the game, there were not any centers built like her. And once she got it, she was so quick going to the basket.
And when she went up for a shot, it was almost like everyone else just fell away from her.
She was like Shaquille O'Neal. So strong and physical, but great hands and great touch around the basket, and a dominant center.
You heard that right. Pat Summitt compared her dominance to that of Shaquille O'Neal. That year at the Olympics, she averaged 15 points and 7 rebounds, which led the Olympic team in both of those categories. Even greater than that, she was literally the first woman ever to score a bucket in the Olympics. Many people have called her the first ever female basketball superstar, but yet most people don't even know that she exists. Lusia Harris was born February 10, 1955 in Mentor City, Mississippi to Ethel and Willie Harris, a vegetable farmer. She is the 10th of 11 children and the 4th of 5 daughters. All her brothers and one of her older sisters also played basketball. Harris and her siblings attended Amanda Elsie High School in Greenwood, Mississippi. During her high school career, she set her high school record by scoring 46 points in a game. Now, I know that doesn't sound like a lot these days, but back then, many girls' programs around the country were still playing 6-on-6 basketball. Yes, you heard that right, 6-on-6. And as you probably could have guessed, 6-on-6 had a completely different set of rules that I'm going to be going over in part 2 of this video series, so make sure you subscribe. But since Mississippi was one of the first states to adopt the 5-on-5 rules for girls basketball, Lucy was one of the first dominant female basketball players playing by the men's rules. After leading her team to 3 straight state tournaments, Lucy was faced with a decision where to attend college. She could go to the historically black college, Alcorn State University, where there was no women's basketball team. Or she could go to the predominantly white college, Delta State University, where thanks to the newly signed law Title IX, they were restarting their women's basketball program after it was defunded nearly 40 years earlier. If she went to Alcorn State University, she wouldn't be able to continue her basketball career. But at Delta State University, she would be able to continue to play basketball. The only downside? She was black and would be going to a predominantly white school. Now, I know that many of our news outlets would like you to believe that the racial tension in this country has never been higher. But you gotta remember, this is Mississippi in the 1960s and 70s. This was a time where black people weren't allowed to eat in the same building as whites, walk on the same side of the sidewalk, or even make eye contact with white people. But Lucy wanted to play basketball, so even at the risk of her own life, she decided to go play at Delta State University. She was the only black girl on the team. In Lucy's own words, "I had seen white people before, but I had never talked to them."
Although the school was less than an hour away from her home, Harris found herself in a different world.
She was the only African American on her team at Delta State, and to cross over into the racial barriers of Mississippi in the 1970s. There's been a certain sort of isolation.
People would say things from the stands, but I would just brush it off because I said it's just part of the game. You know, trying to get me distracted from what I'm doing.
During her first year at Delta State, the Lady Statesman went 16-2 and finished third in the regional tournament and failed to qualify for the national tournament. Back then, the NCAA still were not hosting female national tournaments, so women's college teams competed in tournaments hosted by the Association for Intercollegiate Athletic for Women, or the AIAW. During her sophomore campaign, Delta State would go 28-0 and win the AIAW National Championship. Harris and her teammates would go on to win 3 national championships in a row by the end of her senior season. Harris would finish her college playing days with a record of 109-6 at Delta State. During her 4 years, she averaged 26 points and 14 rebounds a game. Her senior year, she led the nation in scoring 1,060 points, or 31 points per game that season. She would end her college career as Delta State's all-time leading scorer. Her 25.9 points per game ranks 5th all-time, and her field goal percentage of 63.6 ranks 4th all-time. And even despite all the racial tension there was in Mississippi at the time, the school loved Lucy and even voted her homecoming queen. And then came the 1977 NBA draft. Now, even though the draft consisted of 8 rounds, this wasn't the deepest draft of all time. You had legends like Bernard King, who was picked at number 7, Jack Sigma at number 8, Cedric Maxwell at number 12, and Norm Nixon at number 22. But other than that and a few others, it wasn't the greatest draft in the world. But with the 137th pick of the 1977 NBA draft, the New Orleans Jazz selected the 6'3" center from Mentor City, Mississippi. Now, it should be noted that Miss Lusia Harris was selected ahead of 33 other men, including, get this now, you ready? A guy who in the 1976 Olympics set several world records and was being dubbed as the greatest athlete in the world. Bruce Jenner. Fucking Kylie Jenner's dad. When Lucy got the call she was drafted, she thought it was a joke, and later it was revealed that the reason Lucy never showed up to tryouts was because she was pregnant. According to the Jazz GM at the time, Louis Schaffel, it was all a publicity stunt. But Lucy knew she could dominate a lot of male players, but doubted that she could compete against the likes of Dr. J, Kareem, Bill Walton, or Bob Lanier. She knows she was born about 20 years too early. Had the WNBA existed back then, Lucy would have cleaned up. None of the 6 players chosen before her made the Jazz team either, and the Jazz would end up having a losing season. She did end up playing 1 season professional in the WBPL, but eventually she would settle down, get married, and move back to Mississippi, where she became a teacher and a coach. For all her accomplishment, Lucy would go on to be inducted in the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame, becoming the first African American woman inducted in the hall. So there you have it, the first woman ever drafted into the NBA. Well, sort of. In 1969, there was a woman who would average 69 points per game in high school, and technically, she was the first woman ever drafted into the NBA. But her story is a little bit more complicated than that, so you'll have to subscribe and stick around for part 2 to see her story. Like it if you like it, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you next time. Peace. Thank you.